Nandipha, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to African Diaries.
Hi, thank you for having me. Evening.
I want to talk about art for a second. Yeah,
Mm.
I feel as though, and this is just Shayla's sentiment, it has nothing to do with the world. I feel as though, for the most part, it's a really difficult thing to try and interpret an artist's work.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this because, sure, we can study shades, colors, tonality, scale, grade. We can try and understand that. But the heart and the crux of what the person was trying to convey can be lost in simplicity. Is that a good way to look at art, or am I misled?
Well, I think it's quite a complex but also easy thing. I think that, obviously as an artist, there are certain things that you want to relay, certain things that you want your artwork to kind of embody. But I think that if your work doesn't speak to certain elements, then in a way you've kind of lost your audience. Of course, we all have our own interpretations, we all have our own histories and our own ways of understanding things.
Yeah.
But if things are too lost in translation, then I think that in a strange way, you have failed as an artist.
Sure.
So that's why I'm saying it's quite a complex, but also an easy kind of thing in a way.
Sure. Nandipha, we could also be giving people the room to explore. Sometimes
Mhm.
a question mark is the best place to leave something because it gets the next person thinking. But I do hear your sentiment. So your work often blurs the line between human and animal. I want to know where that came from. Why? What was going on?
Well, I think the reality of how we exist is that as human beings, we are animals. Um, and because of, I think, how we in some certain ways try and see ourselves above animals. We imagine that there's certain elements of things that we wouldn't do. But if you look at history, if you look at stories of civilization, animals and humans have always kind of lived alongside each other, or have, had spaces where our bodies have either merged with one another, where we have stories of half animal, half human beings, with the stories of creation. Humanity and animals have always kind of lived alongside each other. And the reality is that we have elements of ourselves as human beings that are quote unquote animalistic. So
Yeah.
if we are pushed towards a certain point, there are um, sort of sections of how we are as human beings that are very harmful
Yeah.
and very kind of harsh. So, I think for me, the animal and the human can never be separated from one another.
Sure. Now, many viewers describe your work as both beautiful yet unsettling at the same time. Is that a contrast that you specifically aim for?
Well, I think yes and no. It kind of comes back to what I was saying in the
Yeah.
fact that we have very kind of civilized and beautiful elements of who we are as humanity. But then at the same time, we have this very kind of dark um, and maybe unsettling element of how we exist and how we behave at times. And so I think more than it being something that was intentional, I think it gives a viewer the reality of who we are as society, as humanity, and how we can't divorce ourselves from certain elements of how we behave.
Your pieces also explore themes of gender identity and power. How do
Mhm.
these ideas show up in such a way that help you construct your work?
Well, I'm trained as a sculptor
Yeah.
and I'm a little bit older now, but when I was a lot younger, there were very few female sculptors
Mm.
functioning and working, and so when people saw my work, there was the assumption, because when you're either exhibiting overseas or when people don't necessarily understand that the name Nandipha belongs to a woman, the material that I was using made people assume that I was a man, and so because of this very complex space where female sculptors were very far and few between, the material that I was using, as in the cowhide and also the bronze at the time, kind of confused viewers. uh, there was this very complex question of identity, of gender, of the roles that women should and shouldn't play.
Yeah.
Um, and so that became quite an interesting point for me within my work.
I want to get to your point of finality, right?
Mm.
So you explore these themes through your work, and of course, you bring about these beautiful creations. But there has to come, to an extent, a conclusion with the thought process. Are
Mhm.
there some of the conclusions that you can share with us when it comes to your work?
Well, I mean, I think that the main thing is that perhaps the space of understanding gender, of understanding identity, is quite complex. And now, we're in this moment where how we, I guess, live alongside each other, how we understand history. A series of my work has been centered around bullfighting, for instance, and how within that art form or that sport, there are very few women who have kind of played roles within that space. Um, and then another series of work was centered around what people kind of commonly know as the Amazons of Dahomey, and this army of women
Yeah.
who were in some ways misrepresented, and then in an interesting way feeds into history and how histories are kind of shifted and changed depending on who's telling the story. And so I think there isn't really a conclusion yet because I'm still kind of unearthing and exploring so many different things. But more than anything, I think mainly the space of continuing to ask questions and continuing to rethink what we understand around history, what we understand around material, what we understand around divisions of labor,
Yeah.
how men and women function within society. So there is no conclusion. I'm still
Sure.
continuing to ask the questions, to be honest.
And we absolutely love that, Nandipha. That is the voice of an artist whose work is striking, it's provocative, and it's impossible to ignore. South African artist Nandipha Mntambo joins us this evening, having built an international reputation for sculptures and installations that explore identity, human body, and the relationship with nature. She's on the line with us. If you want to send through your questions, do find us on WhatsApp +27832886684. Nandipha, I want to step into the world of art, right? These, and I say this because it's such a complex space, at least for me. It's a complex space that allows you to sort of get in touch with your inner self, because I think directive of understanding doesn't come from your thought process. I think it's a point of relation with the sculpture, with the work of art, whether it is photography, whether it's movement art, you name it. It's something that has to connect with you internally in order for you to bring about some kind of perception. Where do you think we are in the state of art? What is it that we're trying to express? Where artists' headspace is at right now?
I think the space of individuality is quite an important one on many levels.
Yeah.
The understanding that art is not necessarily just a kind of highbrow, white cube space engagement anymore.
Yeah.
So how we make art, the materials that can be used to make art, the people that can engage within the making and the viewing of art and the buying of art have also kind of shifted in a way. So there's a more open field, let me say, of how people engage with the visual. So how people understand performance, how we understand what our bodies do when we're performing, and how a viewer then understands what we're doing while we're performing, has shifted. And I think that, there's the understanding that art is such an integral part of society.
Sure.
Whether we look at, even in kind of apartheid times when art was used as a vehicle for kind of making a political movement or a political statement. I think that space of being a connector has really been highlighted within this moment.
I do think that there is a very strong sense of purist movements within the frame of art. And I say that this is the case because they have been, to an extent, divides. And I think you even addressed it to say who can participate in art, who can buy art, who can walk into the room and claim to be an artist. In your own view, through your own lens, do you think that there is a level and a point of purity that should be preserved when looking at art?
That's quite a complicated question to answer because I'm not a self-taught artist. I went to university and studied for a very long time to do what I do, but that doesn't at all disqualify or make a self-taught artist any less in terms of their skill or what they have to say or their voice within the space. There was a moment where, particular types of collectors were viewed as more interesting or more highbrow than somebody else. But the reality is that that's shifted, and we need to embrace the shift and the change. What art materials used to be 20 years ago versus what we understand to be art material or art product right now has shifted. So I think the space of embracing change is very important. But at the same time, I think it comes back to my first point around if you are just making things and your intention isn't very clear in the things that you're making. And so you're relying on the viewer to create intention or to create meaning for you as the artist or the creator, then we're sitting in a bit of a problem.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Nandipha, I want you to run us through a crash course. This is me putting you on the spot. Yes.
Okay.
For those who are not familiar with the space of art, who have been saying, I want to go into a room, I want to go to an exhibition, a showcase of kinds, but I feel like I'm not going to fit in. I don't even know where to start the conversation. I don't know the jargon. I don't know what I'm looking at. If I go and I see a man with a dog face, I don't know what to make of this. Perhaps give us a few things to note, just a surface level thing so that someone can walk in with some level of confidence and acquaint themselves with the world of art.
Well, I think more than anything, art isn't really about a script. There are certain sort of points that one needs to think on, but if the artwork that you are looking at, or if the music or the performance or whatever it is doesn't engage you in some way, then perhaps it's just not the space for you. Not that it's not the space, but maybe it's not the exhibition or the music performance for you. So I think more than anything, the viewer needs to have an openness to exploring something that they maybe hadn't thought of before. Um, I think the other thing is understanding for yourself as a viewer the things that you are drawn to, the things that you like, the colors that interest you, the
Yeah.
imagery that interests you. I don't think that there's a prescriptive way in which things um, work or don't work. But I, yeah, I think, understanding for yourself as a person, what is it that you like? What is it that interests you? If you read particular books, if you listen to certain music, what is it about the way that the book is written that interests you, or the way that the music sounds to you that interests you? And interrogate that within yourself first before trying to engage with too much, I think.
Sure. And I think from your perspective as the artiste, let's talk about. I think this is a frequently asked question: the lucrative nature of the
Hmm.
world of art. I mean, you are quite the successful artist, and of course, you've put in time, dedication, training, investment. You have seen this course to finish. For an artist who's thinking to themselves, I want to enter, but I feel like, firstly, I hear my mom's voice in the back of my head saying, this is not a job. It's a hobby, or I'm hearing my friend telling me, listen, better you go study and do this as a hobby. But I really do feel like I want to step into the space. Is it lucrative for most artists?
Well, I mean, I never thought that I would not necessarily have to have another job
Yeah.
other than being an artist. Cowhide is difficult to sell, my dear. So, I mean, I honestly never imagined that the material that I had chosen would allow me to have the life that I do at this moment. Um, but at the same time, I challenged myself to learn other forms of art making. So I was trained as a sculptor, but I work in performance, I work in video, I work in photography. And so I think the space of being able to think around diversifying is very helpful. Um, I work in design, I've designed furniture. So I think in as much as there's a question of some people believing that you need to be a purist in that you focus totally on one way of making things and that's it, um, the space of educating oneself around other things is very important.
Sure.
Um, and, I think for me, my parents, my poor dad, he's passed now, but when I told him what I was wanting to do, I was going to be a forensic scientist initially.
Oh,
And they
wow.
were so excited. And, I was at Stellenbosch and I was going to be a scientist.
Yeah.
And it was very exciting at the time. And then when I changed to become an artist, my parents were just like, you're going to be poor. We're going to be looking after you forever. Um, and I think even for them, it was quite a bit of a shock for me to kind of have that drastic change and that shift.
Yeah.
But I think the space of um, not just thinking about art. So I'm very interested in education, and so was able to think around, how can I supplement, especially when I was studying, my income by being a tutor, for instance. And that gives you a different kind of skill
Yeah.
when you understand that the art space and the art market isn't just about making art products. You can get into film, you can get into set design, you can get into furniture design, so there's so many different kind of branches that one can get into once you are in the space of art making. But being open and challenging yourself to learn different types of skills, I think helps you, or at least it helped me, navigate my way around the art world. Because just like in any job, you have ups and downs. Sometimes you're selling more than others. And if you don't allow your mind to help you kind of transport yourself into other ways of expressing yourself or exploring the space of art making, then you do kind of end up stuck, I think.
Sure. Nandipha, I think we will cap it at that for now. Thank you so much for joining us. In actual fact, before I release you, where next will you be exhibiting? What can we expect? Is there a showcasing that's taking place? Tell me more. Tell me more.
Well, I've been nominated for an art award that I think it's going to be, the showcase is going to be in November. So I just finished making the work for that.
Yeah.
And then there are a couple of art fairs and group shows. I just came back from the Cape Town Art Fair, where I was showing, I think 2 weeks ago. And then there's Freeze. In South Africa, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of work happening. But if you happen to be in New York or in Paris, I have a few things happening there. And preparing for a solo show in Cape Town for next year.
Nandipha, you said nothing about Johannesburg, ma'am. Like, I was waiting patiently, very quiet, very ready,
Well, at this moment, nothing in Johannesburg.
Okay.
Unfortunately, but lots of other things.
You know what? We will prioritize New York at this point. Nandipha, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
The voice there of internationally recognized contemporary artist Nandipha Mntambo joining us this evening. One of South Africa's very own, proving to us that the world of art is not just about money making. It's not just about sculpting creations. It's about being intentional, desiring to see a thought that speaks to you as an individual into life and bringing it forth through a form of art. And she's taught us that that's not only possible, it's not only attainable, but it's also very lucrative. Let's get into some music. When we get back, we'll chat tomorrow's touch.